Today on Community Watch, I'm talking with David Dellis, audiovisual technician at Georgia Highlands College and professional honeyman. We'll have a fascinating conversation, and you don't want to miss it. Community Watch starts now. Welcome to Community Watch. I am excited to have with me today David Dellis. Welcome to the show.
How you doing, John?
I'm all right. You are an AV tech, which to me is not, it's not a title that reflects the broad range of skills that you bring to Georgia Highlands. In terms of audiovisual finesse and your own personal genius and ingenuity, those things. I know you keep things running on like all 12 of our campuses.
One of three that keeps theirs. So.
Yeah, but you're kind of hovering like a drone over everything and making sure it's all working right. So, and we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about honey and bees, because I gather that your Georgia Highlands position is mainly to augment your bee work and honey work.
Yeah, that. And like I said, the bee and honey work has started out as a hobby, a way to teach my kids how to run a business when they were young. It was kind of fun, and it just kind of evolved from there.
Yeah. All right. Seriously though, bees, I mean, don't seem like an obvious, simple business to run. That seems like a fairly complicated adventure. How did you settle on bees?
Well, I've always been interested in beekeeping. I don't know, it's just one of those things where you see it and you're like, wow, that would be kind of cool to try to do that. And then my daughter was in the 4th grade, and a beekeeper came to her class at Armory Elementary and did a presentation. So she came home, she said, Dad, we ought to do bees. And I was like, I've actually been researching that. So now I could look at my wife and say, hey, Brooke wants to do bees. So we're in now.
So you had no choice.
Exactly. So my wife couldn't really, she was like, okay. And then, my father-in-law, he's got some property out in Armory. He was actually a row crop farmer, and so we had a place to do bees where I wouldn't have to worry about people getting concerned, because I notice a lot of my neighborhood people, when they hear I'm a beekeeper, the first thing they ask is, "Do you keep them at your house?" Yeah. So it's like, no, I keep them out at the farm.
All right, so that's how it got started. How do you begin? I mean, how do you get started with a business like that? The
first thing is read, like anything, research. You read, and it's like a lot of things. I say beekeeping is more of a trade. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to learn beekeeping, but it's kind of like carpentry. You can read all the books you want about carpentry, and it's great, and they'll give you a good foundation. But until you go actually out there and start hammering wood and putting things together, do you learn? And that's like beekeeping. It's the same way. You start off by research, and there's lots of tons of resources out there. And then most people, once they research it, say, okay, you know what? I think this is something I can try, or they say, nah, this isn't for me. Yeah. And then you pretty much just have to take the plunge, because, it's...
Well, plunging, what does that involve? I mean...
Buying equipment and buying bees. And like a lot of things, prices have gone up. What I did is I researched, there's several local, places, outlets that you can buy bee equipment and bees. And you buy a box, your boxes, your beehives, and you can buy them pre-assembled, unassembled, or you can build them yourself. And it just depends on your skill level and your wallet. And then you go buy packages of bees, and it comes with it's like a cage, and it's got 2 to 3 pounds of bees in it and a queen. And throw them in there, put your queen in, and
So you go like to a bee store?
yeah, there's several. Yeah, the Lafayette. There's one in Lafayette. There's one in Chatsworth, which is a guy I've worked with called Barnyard Bees. A lot of people buy stuff over the mail. You can have bees shipped to you through the mail.
Well, I'm trying to imagine the impact it would have on bees to get shipped, but I guess since they're used to flying anyway.
Yeah, well, they come in the cage, and it's got a little canister that's got sugar syrup in it.
Yeah.
And the queen's in a little cage, and they can ship it. That box can be shipped.
So, all right, obviously you need a queen, and how many bees come with the queen?
2 pounds of bees, 2 and 3 pounds of bees, anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 bees. Yeah.
What?
It's a lot of bees. Yeah. It takes a lot of bees because one bee produces in its lifetime roughly a tablespoon of honey. So you see all those jars of honey I've got. That's a lot of bees doing a lot of work.
So when you got started, did you start with one hive?
I started with 2 because the first rule I learned is it's best to start with 2 hives rather than 1 because you've got one to compare and contrast with. And if one hive's not doing well, you can take resources from one hive to give to the other hive. So it's tough to start with one hive because if it starts going, you've got nowhere to reach out to for help. You know, where with what I do is when I have my beehives now, I have other hives specifically set aside to not necessarily produce honey, but produce resources. So if one of my hives is struggling, I can pull resources from one hive and add it to another hive to kind of keep everything flowing.
And by resources?
Brood. It's just usually it's the resources you would say is brood, or if you're not sure if your queen is doing right, or if you think you've lost your queen, because queens die, things happen, the bees decide, hey, we don't like this queen, we make a new queen, and then the new queen doesn't come back, and if you don't know if you have a queen, you can just take bees from another hive.
They fire the queen?
They do. They're rough. The queen, she's got a great job and got a great life, but if she doesn't do her job, they make short work of her and replace her.
Wow. I have never heard this. So how do they go about firing and rehiring a queen?
It's called a supersedure, and there's a difference between swarms and supersedures. And a supersedure is usually, and once again, nothing's set in stone, but usually when you find a single cell, queen cell, it looks like a peanut, in the middle of a frame, that's usually an indicator that something's wrong with this queen. She's old, or she's just not performing to their standards, or what. And then you know that the bees aren't happy with their queen. And then they swarm sometimes where they get too crowded. The queen takes half the younger bees and flies off. And they leave queen cells, and usually those are hanging off the bottom, and there'll be several of them in there.
So the queen will leave with an entourage?
Correct. If you don't manage things correctly, which that's just nature. That's how they propagate in the wild. So but as a beekeeper and a honey producer, that's not really what we want to have happen because it doesn't hurt the parent hive. You just won't get any honey from it.
So a new queen is born.
And it's the same. They all start the same. All the bees in the hive are female, except for the drones, which are male. And the male's only job is to mate with queens, and that's it. That's all they're really there for. And so they take one cell that starts off as a standard egg, and they feed it a special concoction called royal jelly. It is. That's the truth. And then it turns that one egg, or that larvae, excuse me, into a queen. Yeah.
Now, would there ever be more than one queen?
Normally, I mean, there's been tales of maybe a 2-queen hive, but queens, when there's multiple queen cells, the first queen that hatches, she's got one job: kill any other queen cells or any other queens in the hive. That's the first thing she does, is she checks to make sure there's no other queen cells in the hive, and if she finds one, she'll kill it, because it can only be one. But I've heard tales of people saying there's been 2 queens in a hive, maybe if there's enough distance, and I mean, anything can happen, but extremely rare to unlikely.
All right, so you got started with 2 hives. 2 queens, and they each have their own
Mm-hmm.
group, separate
Mm-hmm.
structures.
Mm-hmm.
And how did that first endeavor go for you?
The first one, it was kind of tough because the first hive I learned about varroa mites because I bought a package, and a lot of them come from South Georgia commercial operations, and so I lost the very first hive due to varroa mites, and I was like, wow, these are brand new bees, but they're full of mites. So I learned really quickly about mites. But then on the second
They
hive,
arrived with mites.
With the
so They
mites.
were
they were correct.
I guess infected is the right word?
Exactly,
Okay.
or they had the mites on them apparently because I read about varroa mite test. I did a test on it and I looked. I said, "Wow, that's a lot of varroa mite." And then the hive subsequently crashed. And but then I was able to take the other hive and split it into 2 hives, which you can do that because if a hive's really strong, you can take what they need to make a new queen, roughly, put it in another hive, and they'll make a new queen, and now you have 2 hives. And
So the mites are a little insect.
yes, it's called a varroa destructor, and that's been a lot of what you see on the news about bees. The problem with bees absconding, how people say the bees are just gone. Well, that's usually due to varroa mite. And,
So how did you get rid of them?
I learned how to do treatments, or bought certain treatments, and there's a myriad of treatments, and now I have a regime I do yearly on my beehives to treat for mites.
Is there any way you can tell if your bees are infected when you order them?
No, not at the time. I didn't. It's hard to tell. What you can do is you can put a mite treatment on them as soon as you get them. But I hadn't bought bees in so long that I hadn't felt the need to.
You only did that at the beginning.
And then I'll probably, like I said, this year I'm actually going to buy some bees. But I know these beekeepers, and I'm just buying for fresh stock type. Just get some fresh stock in the mix. And I know these guys, and I'll probably hive them and then treat them after a couple weeks. So.
All right, so at this stage in your operation, how many hives have you got?
Right now, I vary probably about 15 to 20 production hives, and then about 5 to 7 what I call nucleus hives, which are smaller miniature hives I use for resources. And that fluctuates. Just some hives just make it, some hives don't make it, and so it just fluctuates out because I'll go into a year with fewer hives, and then I'll start splitting and expanding, and so I'll end the year with X number of hives, and then you're always going to lose a few in the winter. It usually happens.
Yeah.
And
So is there and for the size of your operation, is there a number that you like to have that works best?
yeah, for where I am at now, working full time, I don't really want more than about 15 production hives. That usually gives me all the work I want and some.
Yeah.
When you're a one-man show, it gets pretty intensive. It's a lot of work, and that's what a lot of people getting into beekeepers don't realize. Back in the old days, you could just set a beehive out there and go collect honey every now and again. But now that they've got the varroa mite and small hive beetles and various other things, it's a lot more work involved.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize that. And it's not that they don't want to do the work; they don't realize the time commitment that's required.
You're here to warn them today.
Exactly. It's beehive. It's wonderful, but it's a time commitment.
Well, we're coming up on our break. When we come back, we'll get into honey talk
Okay.
and more bee adventures. So please stay with us. We've got a lot of interesting conversation coming up. Do not go away. We'll be right back.
Access to me means I get to explore and define myself.
Access that allows me to follow my passion.
For me, it means I get to do what I've always dreamed of doing, helping people.
Access to me means I'm the first one in my family to come to college. Sé el primero.
Welcome back to Community Watch. I'm talking with David Dellis, who is an audiovisual technician at Georgia Highlands College during the day, and a beekeeper and honey entrepreneur the rest of the time. So we've been talking about how you got started with bees and the complications. How much honey are you typically producing now?
Okay, and that varies between
You're not
hives.
producing, you're
Yeah,
collecting.
correct. And I would also like to throw in there for people starting off, there is the Rome Floyd Beekeepers Association, which wasn't available when I started.
Actually, it does seem like I know quite a few people who are
and that's a great
on some
resource.
level they're doing.
I've just recently
bees.
joined it. Not that I had anything against it. It's just it wasn't around when I started, and I never really thought about it. But that is a wonderful resource. Yeah. People can go to those meetings first Thursday of the month. But back to different hives produce different honey. Some hives produce zero honey. Some hives produce a ton of honey, and that's, as a beekeeper, we try to figure out which hives are doing what and why, and that's where I may replace a queen. If the hive doesn't produce honey, okay, that's usually going to be a queen's not doing her job. So a lot of times I'll take, the genetics from a hive that produces a lot of honey and put them into a hive that doesn't produce much honey and let them raise a queen off of the genetics here.
So you fired a queen.
Yeah, I fire the queen, and I've gotten, and once again, it's just, I think I can get probably about, and other beekeepers can do better. If I can get 100 pounds off a hive, that's really good in what I do. So that's probably about 2 5-gallon buckets, 1 to 2 5-gallon buckets worth of honey on a hive.
That sounds like a lot.
And it is, and it's just it's management. It's what it boils down to. That's the key to everything that's taken me the time to learn. You can read a lot of things, and none of it's bad, but bees are insects, and they don't read the books we read. They do what they want to do. So you have to learn how to manipulate them to produce extra honey, and that's the art in beekeeping, is manipulating the bees to stay in their house, because the queen can leave anytime she wants.
Yeah.
If she can pack up, she's free to leave. And so as a beekeeper, my job is to entice her to stay and give her a wonderful home and produce a lot of extra honey, because the way I do my operation is they have always got what they need in their house. So everything on top of what they've got is mine. And that's the trick, is to get them to produce extra honey for me.
So you have to charm the queen in some way?
Yep, just make the conditions right for making her want to stay, and that's giving her room and space to lay and do what they call manipulations. Like a lot of times if it starts crowding, I'll either start pulling stuff out of the hive and putting stuff in there to kind of give her room, because the minute she feels crowded, she's like, time to go. I got to find a bigger house. This house isn't big enough. And so she'll pack up and leave. And like I said, the hive will survive, but you're just not going to get any honey. And that's the beekeeper's conundrum from the dawn of beekeeping time, is preventing swarms.
So you really need an interior designer, don't you?
That's it.
I knew
exactly
there was
right.
a connection here somewhere. Well, there must be kind of an art to that.
It is, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't, because I'll think I know what I'm doing, and I'm like, I got this, and then all of a sudden it won't work, and it won't. It's just because, once again, we're dealing with insects, and they don't read the plan, and they don't follow the rules.
It's hard to just reason with
I know.
them,
It's like, come on.
Let's work together now. Now, my narrow understanding of the honey world is that from year to year, and certainly with different locations, honey is going to be significantly different.
Correct.
So how does that work, and why is that?
It's what's available to them to make honey alpha. Of the pollen that they bring in and the nectar they bring in dictates the honey. Because what I've noticed is throughout the course of the season, the honey season in Georgia, or where I am in Armurchie, is roughly from probably about, they start making honey in May through about the end of July. And usually about the second week in July, I'm not going to really get much more honey. They do produce something a little bit in the fall from what we call goldenrod, but I leave that's theirs. they can keep that. That gives them storage for the winter. But it all depends on just and I've noticed that earlier in the season the honey is lighter, and I think it's from like blackberry and privet hedge and clover, and then later in the season the honey tends to darken, and I don't know exactly what, because I hadn't moved into that aspect of it, as far as that's a whole nother section of beekeeping, is understanding what they're making honey from, what plant, the horticulture part of it, I guess, and I just don't have. I worry about keeping my bees alive and making honey right now, because everybody likes the honey. So I just said, well, whatever they're making is good, so I'm just going to let it go.
So, at least currently, whatever is growing just naturally in the area.
That's it. I don't plant anything for them. I don't. They just. And being on Armurchie Creek, all of the property we have is all along Armurchie Creek, and I think that has a big say in, because there's just lots of blooming flowers and what have you along the creek.
And you have made your honey. I mean, your honey is available to purchase, and people may be interested in doing that. So, and we can remind people at the end also, but where do they find your honey?
Hey, contact me at Georgia Highlands College, or Old Timer Barbecue. She sells it for me, and she's my primary, because it works out really well. She puts it on the shelf for me, and people come in, buy honey and buy a biscuit or buy some barbecue or what have you. And then my father-in-law at Armurchie Self Storage, he keeps some on hand. But most people know me, or they know of me, and they email me. There's Dellis Honey Farms at gmail.com, and they say, hey Dave, can I get some honey? And we work out an arrangement to meet, and I'm more than happy to do what I can to help people get honey.
Now, I have heard, you may know, but I have heard that it's healthy for folks to get honey from the area that they live in, because it is produced from, I guess, the pollen.
Correct. That's it.
That's in the area they live in, and so that helps with immune system
and the
issues
allergies
and allergies. So is there any truth to that?
Once again, I'm not a doctor, but I have talked to people that know a lot more than me that claim, yes, that is in fact it's beneficial. It doesn't. There's no cure to any of it, but ingesting the pollen from your area, I guess, helps build up your immune, or helps build up your resistance to things like that. And that, from what I've seen, several qualified people have stated that, and I believe it. It's
makes sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense.
Makes sense. Now, I am aware that there are beekeepers in the area who will go out on emergency bee collecting missions. Is that something you do?
I have done it on occasion. The problem where I don't get into is cutouts where they've got them in their house, and you have to physically get in there, and I can tear stuff up all day long. It's just fixing it back. It's the problem.
They expect you to fix it back?
And a lot of times people think you'll come do it for free because you're getting free bees, but it's a lot of work. And plus now I think the laws are changing where you have to have a contractor license now to tear up somebody's house to get bees out of it.
Right.
So, and I'm just not interested in that. But a lot of times people say, hey, there's bees in my tree, do something with them, come get them. I'm like, okay, I'll come get them. And
so what's going on when there's I don't know the right word.
A swarm. That's it. When the queen decides to leave, what happens is scouts go out and they look for a new home. And then so what happens is the initial swarm will leave, and they got to find a place to kind of hang out till they figure out which home's the right home. So they'll go up and they'll park in a tree or park anywhere. You can see them anywhere, on trailers, on houses, anywhere, and they'll just go sit from it and they'll collect. That's a collection point. And then once the scouts come back and say, hey, I got a home, then they take off. And it looks like a tornado of bees just.
So how long is that likely to be?
And it once again, it varies. I've heard usually not more than, I would say, 24 hours, maybe 48 hours they'll stay in a spot. But usually it's not that long. I would say 48 hours would be, That'd be a long one, but
So when you get a call or you hear about a swarm hanging out somewhere, you know that you don't have a whole lot of time to move.
exactly, correct.
And how does one collect? Do you collect them and they voluntarily just go with you?
What the key to the whole collection of a swarm is to get the queen. Because usually what I do is I have boxes specifically, and I have swarm traps. I actually set some out at the college. And it's baited areas. That's the exact space that bees love. I have some old comb in there. And then I have a thing called Swarm Commander. It's a little
Swarm Commander.
It's a scent, kind of like a deer scent. You know, people put out deer scent, but you can do that for bees. And bees, the scout bees will find this and they'll just move into the equipment. But if that doesn't happen, basically they're in a cluster on a branch, and you put your box down, you give it a good shake, and they'll drop. And I've demonstrated this many times with people. And you drop and you just put a top on it just a little bit, but leave it open, and then all of a sudden you'll see the bees on the hive start fanning. They'll stick their little rear ends up and they'll just start fanning air to let them know that the queen's down here. And it's just you'll just see them just start funneling down into your box. You just leave your box there for a while, and for about an hour or 2 hours, come back and they'll all be in your box. You just pack up your box and go.
Well, that's remarkable. So it's not a case where you have to wear a hazmat suit and.
I sometimes will wear a jacket. Mostly swarms are not going to bother you because they've got bigger problems, but they can sting you. But they won't bother usually people around them. Sometimes if you're shaking them, that you may get a sting or two, but for the most part, swarms aren't going to bother people because they don't have a home really to defend. So
yeah. Has stinging been an issue?
I wear protective gear. I know several beekeepers that don't, and I wear a vented, what's called a vented bee jacket, and some leather gloves, and I don't get stung that often. But you really want to get stung every now and again to keep that immunity built up. So, from what I hear,
because the collection process, does that involve getting your hands up among the bees, or
sometimes it just depends on where they are and how you get, because sometimes they can be way up in a tree, and that can be problematic, and it all depends on where they are, because I've seen people take buckets on the end of a pole and just trying to knock them into the bucket, and then take the bucket and dump it in the hive and hope you get the queen.
And when you actually are collecting honey, is that part of the machinery that does that?
Okay, I don't. Yeah, that does. When we collect honey, because that's the process itself, and the bees don't particularly care for that.
Yeah.
But I go in there and I've got my honey boxes, and I go in there and I'll smoke them down, or I'll put in what's called a bee escape, like a day or so early, where bees come down but they can't get back up, and then they come down. Then I go through and I pull boxes and take them to the honey house.
Well, David, we're about out of time. So what is the website again?
Well, my address is just the Dellis Honey Farms at gmail.com. I don't have a website.
Dellis, Dellis.
Honey Farms,
Honey
all
Farms
one word.
At
gmail.com.
gmail.com. So that's how you get your honey, and it's honestly excellent honey. You're talking to your bees just fine. Apparently, the communication process, as weird as it is working for you. So good for you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Community Watch this week, and we'll see you again next time. Bye now.